This is the War Room Roundtable podcast, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant businessmen and women on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on the road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their successes into your life and business. The War Room Roundtable is brought to you by your hosts, Jason Miller, CEO of Strategic Advisor Board, and Phillip Lanos, CEO of Own the Rhythm, and former podcast host for Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. Welcome to the War Room, Melanie Fine. How are you?
That's great to be here. I'm feeling good today. How are you doing, Phillip?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm actually excited. Jason and I don't often get a chance to talk to somebody who is contributing to Forbes on a very regular basis and helping entrepreneurs get their thoughts out there and putting them in the position they need to get ahead. So this is a treat for anyone that's listening. So in honor of what we usually do, we're going to have to switch it up a little. And I think it's actually very nice to do so. What I want to know is, when did you first start being able to create stories?
Oh, please, first grade.
Okay. And like you consciously were like, ooh, I got a great idea for a story.
I think I was a writer out of the womb. And, and this will probably ring true to a lot of your listeners. Immediately, for some reason, I had a very practical sense of where I was going in the world. Like I needed to take care of myself, take care of my family, whatever that was. So, no one's going to be a writer and make money. So I poo-pooed that. I went to pre-med. I did everything according to the way I was supposed to go. But that writing thing kept gnawing at me. So yes, from the womb, I've been a writer, but I see it. I used to see it as an art that you don't make money from.
And now, is this related to sort of like growing up watching your parents too? I mean, were they because it sounded like they had a lot of pressure in your direction. Was that because they were also doctors, lawyers, things of that nature?
Doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. No, my father was, there was a lot of pressure from my mother. I don't want to call it pressure. She wanted me to go to medical school because that's what she had always wanted to do. And I was always passionate and incredibly successful in science and math. So that's a big piece of who I am. But yeah, she definitely wanted me to fulfill that dream that she never fulfilled. And my father was a businessman. My father owned supermarkets. And if you know anything about the retail business, and especially supermarkets, it is tiny margins. It is, you work yourself to the bone day in and day out to provide for your family. I mean, he provided very well for us, but it was not lost on me how hard he worked and how many hours he put into this business.
Yeah, no, I can see why you contributed to the fabric of work ethic and went and did exactly what you were supposed to do. You went pre-med, all that. Now, at what point does the wise wizard come in the story that changes things? It's not always a person. For you, what was the turning of the tide? Was it just that you kept hearing the voice and made the decision yourself? Or is there an event you can attribute it to?
It's so interesting when you say wise wizard. I do think that in a way that I like the term wise wizard. I like to also call it God, right?
Yeah.
A lot of failure, Phillip, a lot of failure, a lot of doing the things I was supposed to do and being, smacked on this side, smacked on that side. And realizing that that failure, it's interesting. Sometimes failure teaches you to be more persistent, right? Oh, I'm going to get this goal. I just need to overcome this hump. And there's sometimes it's failure. It's telling you, you know what? No, you have to beat against this wall, not that wall, right? And so it was a lot of things that didn't really work out as I had planned. And so the universe sort of guided me towards this because I ended up not going to medical school, not for any reason except that I took a year off of between college and medical school, and I was going to apply a year later, and I ended up writing music. I took writing courses at UCLA. So I was always into some kind of writing. And so so then I got a job as a teacher. And then in my spare time, I'd be writing. And then, I was going to eventually go to medical school. I never did. And sort of things just landed on me. And they don't land on you easily. It's not like someone hands you, $1 million and says, there you are, you've solved it. But they land on you, people come to you for help with this writing thing, or people come to you. And then I wish I could say it was one thing. I remember I actually dated someone. So I never saw myself as a professional writer. And I dated someone who was an author, was a published author, was a very successful journalist. And she told me that my writing was as good or better than anyone else she's read, which I think that was a big piece, actually, now that I think about it. It just needed someone to tell me that it was okay, that I was good, and that I should pursue this, or I can pursue it. I don't think she said should, but just someone telling me that I was good enough. Because what do we know? The world is telling us how we're never good enough, right? From our parents to our teachers. I mean, everybody has the best intent. And then, if you're going out in the world and you're going to be a writer, people say, well, writers don't make money, right? Especially in this era of journalism, they make pipsqueak. I mean, they make next to nothing because so many people are scrambling to do it for free. So it's probably ultimately someone saying you're good enough, or you're more than good enough, and having that from the wise wizard, I guess, is what you say. Yeah. And maybe that was also putting a little God in my path. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. I listening to the story, I can only imagine at some point you took that break and you said, I just don't know. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know if I can keep going in this direction. Yeah. It's taking everything for me to stay on this path.
Right.
And I don't feel like it feels natural. And so, you take some time off, do whatever you can to keep things afloat. And then you run into a writer and you're like, oh, well, and man, I've got a whole story for that I won't get into, but there's an interesting event taking place there. And you, of course, engage that direction that life sends your way. And you start to explore that, only to hear the affirmation.
Right.
That changed everything, because I imagine the level of clarity the minute you heard that
it's
came
so
to
interesting. You. Yeah. To come from the right person at the right, I think it's also timing, right? Because I remember, how many moves have we made in our lives? I remember going through bins. I had these bins and I was just trying to get rid of this. I think it was I was paying for storage or something, which is like the most horrible thing to spend money on, self-storage, right? And so I'm going through bins of things, and they're all my writings, all writing projects that I started. I had done a lot of work on and never finished. And that feeling, and this was probably in my 20s or 30s, that feeling was overwhelming grief. Like, all of this started stuff. I have this drive to do it, but I just never got myself there. And living with that sense of I don't know, not reaching my dreams, or not moving so that I could actually finish a project, even if the project didn't work out, that I couldn't bring things to fruition. That was such a weight on me. And this one wise wizard was such a relief. And once you know that you can, once someone that you trust in knows that you can, it's a lot easier to pitch people. It's a lot easier. I mean, within a week, I was in Huffington Post.
I was going to say,
you just have to get the permission. And it's so crazy, because why do we need permission? It's all out there. Just go and do it.
It's because it could have been anybody who said that to you, but this happened to be a published writer, right, who what they say carries weight,
right, and made her living as such. Yeah,
it couldn't have come from anybody else where it would have had the same impact. And I think that's an important thing, because now you're working with entrepreneurs on a regular basis, quite consciously, to get the best out of them and to help write something that makes sense, or to talk about story of their lives that really puts them in the right light, where it also contributes to the overall ethos of whatever publication you're working on. So it's really interesting to see how that genesis happened, because there's another life where you could have been a doctor, right, or something, and that
I'd still probably be writing.
that sounds like a nightmare for somebody who wanted something completely different. Now, before I go any further, I want to let Jason come on into the conversation, because I know he's been sitting there listening to this breakdown.
What I love about it, right, is it is like the perfect entrepreneurial journey, right? I mean, it really is. It's the layout of maybe there wasn't like a company surrounding it, but it was still the entrepreneurial journey the whole way, right? Of just not packaged around a structure of a company and all these things, right? And when like me, for instance, I don't like to read, but I like to write. I really do. I love writing. I mean, I've published 7 books of my own, and I love to write. It's a lot of fun to write. But, we often don't think about that's like its own journey in life, right? Is writing. It's like its own passion of, and it really is, it's a business in itself, is
It's a
writing.
hero's journey. It's,
Yeah.
you talk about, it is the entrepreneurial journey. It's the hero's journey,
Yeah.
and even when I write fiction, I have a book series out called Rocket Girls, for middle school girls, who are interested in science. And when you write about a character, you're bringing that character with their flaws, everything that's human, that's very real, and you're bringing them to the next stage. And you can do that with your characters, and you can do that with any writing. I mean, what's so great, a lot of people don't really understand story, and they don't understand the hero's journey in their story. And that's sort of my job, is to get that out of them. What is their story? What makes them unique? What makes them something that people can relate to? People don't relate to huge success stories. People relate to people who struggled and who failed, and who are like each one of us, who is not perfect. You create a perfect character and you have no fans, right? Everyone, we're all where we are in life. We always will be going on a path, but it is the hero's journey. And the other thing that people don't understand, like, I don't just write features about people, I write takeaways. Like you said, you don't like to read. Most of us, whether we like to read or not, we don't have time to read. So if I'm going to convince someone to spend 4 or 5 minutes on an article, which is a lot of time in our very fast-paced, attentionless world, it has to give them something that, oh my God, I never thought about that. And every entrepreneur, through his or her journey, has those nuggets. And it's really important to provide those for any reader, because there has to be a payoff for reading it.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part is, for example, we do a lot of conversations here, and often at the end we go, we hope you got the nuggets, right? And we do some degree of like summarizing and trying to highlight the fact that certain things took place in the conversation as a reminder of what was important in the story, because that is an element that, especially in the listening format, right? Quite different from the reading format. And yet the rules still apply. Those who can curate and help bring light to what's being covered by the darkness of maybe lack of attention, or someone who just didn't pick up the story cues the way they should have.
Right.
It's an art. What you do is an art, and yet at the same time, it's a business. And like you said, right now, with everyone willing to do it for free, it's one hell of an industry. But I'm really happy to see that you're in it to win it, and that you're diversifying the way that you create content as well. Because entrepreneurs, they know they need to create content. I know I need to be out there. I know I need to write a lot of should, woulds, but really, there's an imperative to also be able to have a story and to tell your story and know that you already have a story, right? So when you do create insights, do you have a framework to sort of suss it out, or that maybe you can share with the entrepreneur so they can look at their own life sort of in a moment of reflection to determine, like, I am doing something, because that's the end of the day. That's really what they're looking for. They're also looking for someone to help give them permission to say that what they're doing actually has value beyond just a business. Do you have a framework or something of that nature that you sort of use? You don't have to obviously give the entire secret sauce. I'm not asking you to do that. And I know that even if you gave it out, most people won't even know how to apply it to begin with. But what I'm asking for is there anything that you can say to an entrepreneur who's listening about, oh, maybe I should find a way to get myself published on a print publication, like how they can determine for themselves whether or not they're even ready for that?
Right. Well, it's a couple of things. Determining whether they're ready for it. They're always, when they have something that is working, that is bringing in money, then bringing an audience to it is always beneficial. If you are still in the process of figuring out what your business is, and you have a great idea, it's the greatest idea in the world, and and you know it's going to be a success, but you haven't quite tested it. You haven't quite had proof of, what is it called? Proof of market. I don't know. I know there's a term there. I should be good with words, but I'm sometimes I'm not. That's why I like to write, not speak, right? People think that, oh, well, I've got this great idea. I've got this starting thing. I'm going to get publicity. Everybody will come. Well, that doesn't happen that way. You know, the only thing where that happens is Field of Dreams. There's no other place on earth where you build it and they will come. You have to build it. You have to drag people kicking and screaming by your enticing offers and have the most amazing offer in the world to bring them there. So if you don't have an offer, if you don't have something that is tried and true that people love on the other end of it, it's too soon to get publicity. You don't know what to do with that attention. The other thing is, as far as finding your story is your vulnerability. I talk about, I actually have I have a course that it's not really a course, it's a mentorship I do with people who want to be contributors to Entrepreneur or Forbes or things like that. And what I teach them is something called the authority triangle, that every story has to have three things. It has to be directed to your ideal audience. People don't think about that. They just write stories, right? But if I'm writing a story about how I've struggled as a writer and now I make $100 a month on Kindle, right? That could be a story. Who am I going to attract? Am I going to attract Jason Miller to that story? $100 a month on Kindle. That doesn't mean anything to him, right? So it may be a true story, but is it the right story? Right? So you have to know who your audience is. If your audience is high ticket, if your audience is people that are making 6 figures or 7 figures, then you have to tell a story about that audience. Like one of my clients was a 7-figure earner, and he threw in the towel. And so his story is not his story. He wrote other stories, but finally wrote a story saying how he had all this. He had the beach home, the cars, etc., but how he threw it away because it wasn't meaningful to him. And so then he was addressing those people who had everything but didn't have meaning. Before that, he was addressing the wrong people. So you really have to know who the audience is you want to attract in your story. You also want to make sure there's vulnerability. If your story is about how great you are, people send me these pitches all the time. Oh, I am the greatest person. I speak, hundreds of people come, I make millions, I'm the best at this in the world. It's like, who cares, right? So that's an advertisement. So you can take your advertisement wherever you want. Where's your vulnerability? Where did you lose it all? Where did you screw up? And what did you do when you were at your lowest? What is that story, your vulnerability? Because you're reaching your target audience, but your target audience is not experiencing your Facebook brand of life. They're experiencing real life and they have struggles. And unless you can tap into their struggles in your story, they're not going to reach out to you. But if they know that you've had the same struggles and they know that you've achieved what they want to achieve, they will reach out to you, as long as it's the authority triangle, the third vertex of that triangle is positioning. And then that's when you put it on a Forbes. That's when you put it in an Entrepreneur. That's when you put it in Inc. That's when you put it in Success Magazine. Then when you have those two vertices and you have a viable business, then that's when you should be shouting it from the rooftops. But positioning alone won't do it. So many people, get mentioned in Forbes, and I think that's great and everything. That's great for credibility. But if you really want to bring the masses to you, you need to have all three.
Yes. Thank you. And just like when someone who was a published author said the words to you that you write really well, and what that meant to you. I think a lot of entrepreneurs now, knowing that this is the work that you do, to hear you say, look, don't send me another pitch of you raising $82 million and you're successful. And it literally means nothing to who, for what?
Yeah. But yeah, exactly.
In fact, if the ironic thing is, I've met many venture capitalists who say they would never fund anyone who's never lost at all.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's a minimum requirement of entry there. So love what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I'm really happy to see that it didn't turn out the way it did, because I can hear the passion in your voice when you're trying to help people understand the crafting of a narrative. And I can see the passion when you're creating books that are helping young minds shape themselves with coming of age stories. I think I see that this is really your way of relating to the world, right? Through creating characters and things of that nature. And it whispered to you it's funny. It reminds me of the Steven Spielberg thing where, he for a long time thought he was going to be doing other things, but the film thing kept whispering to him. It didn't yell, but it whispered. And it was one of those, right, where you knew it was still back there, but it wasn't demanding. It was very, very patient while you went and did everything except the one thing you were supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
Like the vulnerability. Wow. How many people are willing to admit that everything they worked for meant nothing to them? Very few.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess my follow-up question now is, what are you working on now that you want the listeners to know about that specifically is interesting and exciting to you?
So again, I'm always working on getting entrepreneurs out there. I have connections with some PR agencies that work through me to get people published. If you want a link to those people, I can let you know that. The other thing I do is obviously I write these books, this Rocket Girls. And you can look at rocketgirls.com or go to Amazon and find it. My second book is coming out October 1st. What I would love to do is empower those who want to write, who don't just want someone doing their PR for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Most people want it done for them. And again, I have some really good agents that I could hook you up with. But it's if you want to be a writer like I am, and you want to write for these major magazines, I have this thing called the Authority Boot Camp. And it's a mentorship where I take you through the process, everything that I did to get into Forbes, to get into Entrepreneur, to get into these various magazines, so that you can build that following through your writing. Even if you think you're a bad writer, as long as you don't hate writing, this is for you. If you hate writing, get someone else to do it. Or if you have no time, which, so we're so busy. And for me, I can't, some people write prolifically. It takes me forever to write. So I get it. It takes a long time for me to be happy with a piece. So wherever you fall in that, if you want to be like me and be a contributor on Forbes or Entrepreneur or Inc. or something like that, then reach out to me and I can mentor you through that process. And also, if you want it done for you, you can reach out to me and I can hook you up with some PR agents that I have had success with. They're not all the same out there.
Right on. Okay. Now, before I go on to the two final questions, because the time flew by, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, wow. I want to check in with Jason.
Yeah, I love what you've done with, you've taken all that passion and kind of rolled it up into many different ways to help people. Right. And in that itself, I'm going to bet somebody helped you along that path. Other than that one person, I'm sure there were some others, but we all get to where we get, and it's all on purpose. Right. And I truly believe that, that we get where we get on purpose. And it's because people help shape us in the right direction, or somebody gave us that one piece of guidance at the right time, or we met that one person or few people just at the right point in our life where we were just about to go, I'm done. Right. And then all of a sudden, bam, it happens. And you're like, call it luck, call it fate, call it whatever you want. But it's always like life puts us where we're supposed to be at the right time. And they put us with the right people at the right time, And for me, I've had that happen so many times in my life where Phillip's one of them, where it just happened at the perfect time. So, because our story together is crazy, because he was over at Entrepreneur Magazine and interviewed me at Entrepreneur Magazine. And then it's like, all of a sudden it's like, dude, you got to come over here. You need to be in the war room with me. Right. And there again, everything just happened at the right time. And now we've grown this podcast to one of the top 2% podcasts in the world in 4 months.
Wow.
Right? It's like everything happens for a reason, because it's supposed to. We didn't meet by chance either, right? So with the things that we have going on and so on and so forth. So, as long as we embrace them and make the best out of them, we're unstoppable. The human dynamic is unstoppable. And, all we have to do is culture it, embrace it, and always be going forward, not that way.
Right. Right. And with that said, I mean, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs know this, you have to kiss a lot of frogs.
Yeah, right.
to find the right connection. It rarely happens on your first go around or your 10th go around. How many hundreds of thousands have we thrown at courses and mentors, et cetera. And I think that everything leads us to where we are, but some of them sort of take us the long way around.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's funny. I was going to ask, what would you say if you could go back to that time when you decided you were going to be taking a year off, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself that maybe could have made it not the long way around?
That's a good question. I don't know. Honestly, so if I were to say to myself, what was so interesting about what this woman said to me was that it came from someone who was already published and already where I wanted to be. If I could tell myself that, maybe if your future self is already published where you want to be, you could tell your past self that you'll get there. I guess for me, I've always been invested in time. I've always been worried that time is running out. And as I get older, I would say time is running out faster, right? I mean, not necessarily faster, but there's less time in front of me than there's behind me, right? And so I finally, realized that it's not about time, that it's not about worrying, oh, I'm not going to have enough time to make this in my life, I'm going to be dead before this happens. Is, take your time, luxuriate in it, enjoy it. Because if you don't do that, things will unfold at their own pace. You can't force them. Yeah, you can finish a project maybe a week or a month faster, but things ultimately in the way the universe works will take the time that they take. And you can't really white knuckle it. And white knuckling it is not the way to run through life. Have fun.
Man, I love that you brought that up. This concept of the gestation period, right?
Yeah.
So important, especially when you're writing something like a novel or something. Like, you're going to need to let things marinate, but all you have to do is look at the universe and the way it works when you plant a seed in the ground, and it takes its time to be watered and bear fruit, right? Or the vegetable, what have you. Same thing with giving birth, right? There is at least 9 months of gestation period, and even some time before that.
Rush it, right?
You can't rush these kinds of things. You're right. I love that you brought that up, because it's something that people know intuitively, instinctively, and yet forget every single day of their lives.
let me add the other side to that, though, because it's all gray, nothing's black and white. You have to be persistent as well.
Yeah,
it's not, you can't, the universe is going to bring me this success, and I'm just
law of attraction
in Acapulco and drink margaritas or whatever. You have to do both. But the persistence, and it is persistence, when you write a novel, you have to show up every day and write it, or it's not going to write itself. But you can do it in such a way that, let's say you're a month past deadline, big whoop in the scheme of things, big whoop. So you spent a day with your son at the ballpark because you want to spend time with your son, and you actually had 1,000 words to do that way. So what, right? We nickel and dime the minutes and the seconds, and then we let our whole lives, run out of our control. We should nickel and dime our whole lives, our whole vision, but sort of let the minutes, if something doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, maybe that's why, maybe there's a reason why. So you need to let go, but you also need to put in place, you need to be watering it as well. So it's a balance.
I love it. I love it. And thank you for taking the time to pull that metaphor together. With that said, if it's all right with Jason, we'll move on to the grand finale.
Let's do it.
So, Melanie, for 1,000,000 points, if you could have invited anybody here today to listen to your story, maybe even contributed to it, who would you have loved to have had here, and why?
I'm going to name someone you don't know. Well, you may know it, but I probably don't. Her name is Rachel Carson. She is a female scientist. She died at the age of 56 from breast cancer. She was the start of the environmental movement. She women in the 20s don't really go to college to study science. She was actually a writer / a scientist. And she actually couldn't finish her graduate work at Johns Hopkins because of the Depression, and her family didn't have a lot of money. So she got a job writing 7-minute video segments, radio segments like podcasts, right? 7-minute radio segments for the U.S. Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. So she lived a life where she was unconventional. She didn't have things as easy as other people, whether it be financial or being a woman at a time when women didn't do these things. But she was one of the best science writers ever. And she actually wrote the book that started the whole environmental movement in the 60s. Like, it was published about a year before she died. She, spoke before Congress about it. And so I love the way she had all these obstacles that got in the way, including dying young, right? I'm 56, so that to me is young, right? It's including dying young, that stood in her way of making the impact, the life that she wanted. And with all of that together, she mixed it together and made a life that was even better than what she could probably have imagined going in.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 56 is definitely young. Look at Noam Chomsky. Like, you know what I mean? No, for sure. Wow, Rachel Carson. I'll have to look into what she's done.
She's written 24 books.
Yeah, and for me, that just goes to show the pioneering spirit you have to be able to even name someone like that, and where your interests lie, and what you yourself hope to bring in the spirit of that to the work that you do. For me, I can see how that parallels. And why it is that you're so passionate about writing, and how it's really the journey of a maverick, of somebody doing things their way. Very Frank Sinatra, if you will, right, and for me, I think every entrepreneur can respect that. Anyone who's ever gone out of their own way to try to risk it all and hope that it turns into something through faith and grit and determination and patience. All the things that we've covered throughout this entire conversation, right. But also the most important one, which Jason took a lot of time to highlight, which was acceptance of the here and now, and knowing that you have to have trust, or another word for that is faith, acceptance, right. And faith. So thank you so much, Melanie. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to hear your story, learn about what you're doing. Thank you for inviting people to be mentored by you as well, by the program. What was the link to that?
So people can reach out to me at mel@melaniefine.com, and I can give them more information about the program.
Okay, right on. Those are my closing thoughts. Jason, you can close us out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I would say this: you are a hero's journey, for sure. And there is no journey that does not have struggle. There's no journey that does not have hard times, because it's not Hollywood,
right?
Right? It's not Hollywood. And that's the beauty behind your story. Like I said before, is it's an entrepreneur's journey, but it's not a business journey. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's very unique, actually. It's very unique for this show, for sure. And there's a lot to be learned by that, actually. And I hope business owners, like a lot of business owners that listen to this, really identify that with your journey, how it parallels somebody that runs a multi-million or even $1 billion company. It's the same journey. So it's just the same journey. It's just a different thing. That's all.
Yeah. And just, I know that you're closing up, but just let me add to this. Hollywood knows this, by the way. I would say Facebook, because everything's perfect in Facebook, but there's not a story. There's not a movie that's made where the hero doesn't have insurmountable obstacles. Without that, there is no story. And so instead of thinking our obstacles are what are preventing us from achieving what we want to achieve, our obstacles are there for a purpose, and they're meant to be overcome.
Yeah, for sure. You got it. Totally hit it perfectly. Well, Melanie, thank you for being on the show. It's a pleasure having you here. So grateful to bring a different perspective to the show, and be able to show entrepreneurs something a little bit different. And that's what we did here today. And for that, we are grateful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Phillip. It's been a pleasure.
Same. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the War Room Roundtable with your hosts, Jason Miller and Phillip Lanos. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and always remember, if you can dream it and believe it, then you can go achieve it. We'll see you in the next episode.